I am really excited to share my afternoon with a man who I've had a very fun and let's say varied experience with over the last few years, and now who I consider to be a real brother in union service and fighting to make our union the best that it can be, and that is Pete Antico. Welcome, brother.
Hey, thanks. It's nice to be here under lockdown.
There's a lot that we can talk about, and Lord knows anybody who knows you can talk. So I'm going to try to focus on a few things that maybe you don't get a chance to talk about a lot, and because really what I hope is people can just get introduced to you, and then this can be the starting point to you coming and speaking more to our union. We talked about you coming and doing talks at the conservatory, member education programs, things like that, because you know just as well as anybody else how much there is to know about our union and the different rules and governance and member categories and issues and pension and health and investments and all these different things. So before we dive into all of that, how are you doing with all of this coronavirus stuff and with the quarantine? How have you been holding up?
Working out 4 times a week, keeps me sane, because certainly we get misinformation on a day-to-day basis, and there's lots of confusion. And I really wish the government would speak peacefully. There's no calm voice. There's only one side against the other. This doctor says this, that doctor says that. And respectfully, the gentleman named Dr. Fauci, who's been around a long time, he's been incorrect every step of the way. So then people are supposed to count on, these health officials, and they call him the United States leading infectious disease expert, but that really wouldn't be true, because there's many other doctors that have much higher accreditations in epidemiology, and that wasn't Mr. Fauci's major, epidemiology.
Yeah.
But he certainly works at the NIAID, and certainly was at the forefront of the AIDS epidemic. But I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done in whoever leads us. It's the same thing with a union as it is with a country. People shouldn't look to other people to lead them. They should look at their advice, listen to it. They should use the gift of their own mind and go research it and say, well, this makes sense. Mm-hmm. He's legitimate. Or go look on the computer and research a bunch of leading epidemiologists' protocols for this kind of thing, like an H1N1 or an avian flu, and look and see what they did. And it was fascinating to me that no one ever quarantined healthy people. And the biggest issue with this is they don't have tests. If they had tests with a proper vector that actually were 99% accurate, because if you get a test that's 60% to 90% accurate and you're getting all these false positives, then people are going outside, going back to work, and they're either asymptomatic carriers or they have a small amount of symptoms. So where is the logic in that?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How do you think, because you are so knowledgeable, you've worked in so many different aspects of our union, and add to that, I'm sure you've done voiceover, stunt performing, principal performing as an actor. Any other? Have you done dance? Have you done
dancing? I took tap dancing. I took tap dancing when I was 7 years old.
How do you see the industry changing as a result of all of this?
Basically, there's a shift in the exhibition systems of how media is consumed. So in the old days, there was only 3 networks, and if you're on a network show, you were king. Everybody in the world knew who you were. Mm-hmm. I mean, Lee Majors went to the Philippines when he was doing the $6 Million Man, and they mobbed him. Al Pacino went there; they didn't know who he was because film isn't it. You're in the television box. You're broadcasted all over the world, and it's basically a marketing and branding tool, just like if you did a national commercial then when people only had 3 networks and your commercial was running nationally. Wow, I saw you on that commercial. It instantly branded you and gave you a higher IQ. You made a lot more money. But your face, because of that branding, just like someone who is great at marketing any particular product, like the Pet Rock, who made $2 million, which is ridiculous. Because the key in any business is really marketing. And if you're good at marketing and you can brand something, I think those are the wealthiest people in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So knowing that you have worked in all of these different areas, let's go back for a second because people should know, describe to them how you're involved in the union, what leadership positions you've held. How are you engaged in SAG-AFTRA?
I'm a member. I was a duly elected member of the Los Angeles Local Board, which represents the majority of the earnings in the entire union nationally.
And how long have you been in union service?
About 10 years. And I first started on the National Stunt and Safety Committee, and now I am on the local board. I am the chair of the Los Angeles Local Technology Committee, and I am the co-chair of the Stunt and Safety Committee. These positions are only effective if you can get a group together cognitively and come in and make motions that will actually work to the benefit of the membership. And there's a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, I've made motions 6 years ago that were kicked up the ladder to legal, and the bureaucracy of the Screen Actors Guild just stymies it. Then it matters who's running the national board, because if you make a valid motion and it gets kicked up to the national board and it benefits all the people, it depends which political party is running the union at the time, because if they like you, they may vote it up, and if you don't stand for their ideology, they vote it down, which is extremely disappointing.
So I want to get into that political aspect of it, because I know how engaged you've been in that. But before we get into that whole discussion topic, let's get to know who Pete Antico is just a little bit. Where were you born?
I was born in Queens, New York.
And how did you end up in L.A.?
Well, my father had a printing business, and he moved it out to Los Angeles when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you when you moved here? 7.
All
right. So do you consider yourself a New Yorker or Angelino?
Well, it's very difficult because I identify, my whole family's from New York. So
are they still back out east?
Except for my immediate family, everyone else is back east.
Yeah. Okay. So you do see them often?
I used to see them all the time, but the last year to 2 years, I've been extremely busy traveling and working. So it's been a bit less, and it's interesting that I haven't worked in New York in a couple of years, which is strange because I usually used to get back there and work all the time.
What is your immediate family? Any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I have a brother and a sister, and lots of cousins.
Where are you in the mix? Are you the youngest, oldest? You're in the middle. You're in the middle, the peacemaker.
Yeah. Lots of Guidos in my family.
Yeah, what is your, I assume Antico's Italian? Is that
Sicilian?
Sicilian,
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's actually half, this is the way it works. It's half Sicilian, half Italian, because my mother's Napolitan and my father's Sicilian. So no Sicilians ever say they're Italian. No Italians ever say they're Sicilian. And anybody that's Sicilian will understand that.
Do you speak Sicilian or Italian?
I speak a little bit of Italian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. So how did you get into the entertainment business?
Interesting story. I was in college. I went to California Lutheran University. I was on the track team there, and I was studying political science, and my professor wanted me to go to law school. But I had a case of Tourette Syndrome, which is pretty bad at that time. And the athletics were the only thing that gave me a release that I can feel like I fit in to society. Because in high school, I ran track, played football, baseball, and wrestled. Mm-hmm. And I tied for first place for the league in the pole vault, and I pole vaulted in junior college, which was great fun. Played baseball as well, and then ended up going to Kalu, and then went to took some courses at UCLA in the writers program. But how I got into it was a good friend of mine who was a fireman in Ventura knew this guy who lived on a boat, and he said he was a stuntman, and I was like, my last year of college, he goes, stuntman, man, that sounds like fun. What do they get to do? I mean, and he goes, well, his wife got eaten by the shark in Jaws. I said, really? I mean, the naked woman that got pulled down? He said, I said, I'd love to meet him. So they took me down to Ventura, and I met him, and he was like, I want to say a miniature version of if he was tall and had dark hair, he'd have been James Bond, because I mean he was extremely fit, blonde, and had all these tigers and lions and bears around him, and he took me out in the wilderness, and I was walking with a lion and the Lincoln Mercury cougar. The cougar that was actually in the commercials, and I'm just walking with him and his girl Susan Bacalini, who was the girl from Jaws, and I mean, I don't know if you've ever been up close and personal with a lion, but I mean, when you just touch his body or pet his tail's a muscle. I mean, it's like it's a little bit different, because you realize how mortal you are. Mm-hmm. Anytime you go into nature and at 20 years old, it's like I felt like so vulnerable and going, my God, the mortality. I mean, nothing is more powerful than nature, and everyone must bow to the God of nature and the nature in God.
I think we're seeing that on a daily basis now.
Yes, we certainly are. So I met him, and then he recommended me to a stunt school, a guy named Paul Stater, who was the stunt coordinator on The Great Race and The Poseidon Adventure and these huge movies. And he lived at the beach, and he had this school in Santa Monica, California. And I got enrolled in this stunt school, and I went there for like a year and a half, and then I got introduced to a guy named Terry Leonard from Monty, and Terry Leonard is a legend in the stunt business. And he was a sec unit director on like Apocalypse Now, and he was a stunt coordinator on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I mean, he duplicated Yakima Canutt's famous stunt of jumping on horseback and jumping from horse to horse off a stagecoach, and then falling underneath it to the back. And pushing himself up on the rear, and then he did it in Indiana Jones on a truck, and I mean Terry is a phenomenal individual. Anybody would be lucky to know him. He started on John Wayne movies, and his experience and expertise in the film making world is brilliant, and he's just a brilliant addition and a treasure in our business. So I was very fortunate, to meet him. And the first movie I worked on was 1941. It was Steven Spielberg, and it was in the USO fight. And I was standing around, and Terry goes, "Hey, Pete, grab that chair, break it over that guy's back." and that was my first stunt job on a film. And how I got in the union, Taft-Hartley, because I was working as an extra in the SEG, Screen Extras Guild at the time, for a year. Mm-hmm. And coming as a really high-level athlete and getting into the Screen Extras Guild was quite an experience. I didn't really take to it too well, because the assistant directors, it was such a hierarchy that they treated extras like garbage. And I never stood for that, and they didn't understand who's this rebel, because respectfully, I mean, there's a couple times I told these ADs, "Hey, shut the fuck up, or you're going to be smelling out of your ear." and the thing is as you progress and get more wisdom, I mean, kindness is all souls are created equal. Be kind to people. There's no reason not to be kind. If someone's babe, there's some background artists that turned out to be some huge, name actors, and they've went into fields of writing, because being a background artist is a great way to learn the structure of the film business and how it works and how a set works. So if you wanted to jump into any other field, higher up in front of the camera or production, you certainly would have a first-hand experience. So I think that's great. Then I got an opportunity. I was working on Charlie's Angels with Farrah Fawcett. And they asked me to do a little judo throw, because I had a boxing and kickboxing background, and I was fighting of the sort since I was 18 years old. So when I was 21, I was in this scene. They said, "Can any of you guys do martial arts?" I said, "Sure." "Can you flip this guy?" "Sure." So me and my friend, who actually were working, we both did martial arts. So I flipped him, and I got Taft-Hartley. That was considered a stunt. So then I got in the Screen Actors Guild. And I tell you what, when I first got that card in 1979, I jumped through the roof. I was so happy, because I mean, this was
I
like
was born in 1980.
yeah. I mean, this was like the cream of the crop, the union to be in. You know, I'm in the same union, you know, with James Cagney was, and I mean, it's like we're in the same, you know, brotherhood, and I was extremely proud and excited to have this card, which brings us up to today, where they give Screen Actors Guild cards out like they give out, you know, fruit punch at a lemonade stand.
What would you say is the contrast between joining in 1979 and today? How is SAG different than Sag Aftra is today?
Well, SAG was a totally different union than SAG Aftra, but
How so? Because a lot of people listening don't know. I mean, we've now had the merger of SAG and AFTRA for 8 years. So there's a lot of members who never were part of AFTRA and were never part of Legacy SAG. So all they know is SAG AFTRA. So how would you describe the difference between what SAG was and what SAG AFTRA is today?
Well, SAG was a much more prestigious, much more well organized, both in business and creatively. It was probably the most premier, powerful entertainment labor union in the world, and the actors' voices, the big names who supported it, who actively supported it, gave it strength. Nowadays, not many name actors come out to play. They're too busy producing, and they're more worried about their own business conglomerates that they're creating in their own brands than to go back to the union that gave them the structure to start. And I think that needs to change. If our union wants to move forward with any kind of force, especially in this environment where salaries of all entertainers, whether it be in front of the camera, IATSE or SAG-AFTRA, are being stopped, completely stopped. And people are trying to live off residuals and the meager amounts of money that the government is throwing at them. But that doesn't support the pension plans, or that doesn't support your health plan. And in order for a union to operate, there's two things. It needs to support wages and working conditions, number one, and number two, a good pension and healthcare system. Those are the two main reasons to be in a union. And if those go away, the union will just dissolve.
Now, you've worked with a lot of high-profile performers over the course of your career. What do you think is the reason why a performer who succeeds beyond a certain level stops identifying with their brothers and sisters of SAG-AFTRA as much and now identifies more as a producer and somebody who is actually would sit across the table from us as opposed to at the table with us?
That's a hard question. It's like you start out, or you can start out as a background artist, you're fighting for people, then all of a sudden you become a lead on a TV series. And all of a sudden they're trying to say, oh, we can't afford this, and we'll cut these 3 background artists out. And you're going, wait a minute. I mean, you're paying me $125,000 an episode. You want to cut these 3 guys out that are, making $120 a day? Or at the time it was like $60 a day. Mm-hmm. So that part of it is should be factored in, because when you're only as good as your weakest link. If you took care of the entire background community, and a lot of people will disagree with me, but if you take care of the background community and make sure that they're well protected, they're proud, they can come to work, and they can eat they can have the same food as the cast, the SAG players and the stunt people, they could be treated as equals, as human beings. It's more humanitarian. Mm-hmm. The kinder and the better you treat people, the more they want to break their butt for you, and that goes that starts from the top down. You from the producer to the director, you start treating people with dignity, and both monetarily and as equals, because you tell them, oh, you got to go in that room, you can have your snack, your potato chips and whatever, and your apple, and it's like it's not dignified. Now,
When did that start? Because what I'm also interested is you said you were a member of SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. So one of the areas, so there's the book that I read called The Politics of Glamour, which is the history of SAG up until about 1987, and it ends around the time SAG was absorbed by SAG. What was SAG, and how did it end, and why did it get folded into SAG?
Well, it was a Screen Actors Guild, and they had their own entity, and
why? Why did they have their own entity?
But it was like, you could make money. I mean, respectfully, when it started, it was like there was a Screen Actors Guild and the Screen Actors Guild. And when you called in and from Central Casting, which was the premier place to get jobs, it's different. Can you ride a horse? Yes, I'm a decent horseman. So you'd get a job riding a horse. But you get a bump for riding a horse. You wouldn't get your normal rate. You'd get more money. And don't forget, in 1979, 1980, 81, 82, the value of a dollar, the purchasing power, was a hell of a lot more than it was now. So it was actually valuable. And I think it started this, I think a daily was like 200, I think when I started it was closer to $380 or $400 a day.
Wow.
I mean, which is like, wow. And if you got a good adjustment, or you're a background artist and it was $50-$60 a day, and then you got a silent bit, which meant it's when the camera keys on you, or if you're a waiter and you walked up and the waiter, can I have this drink, and the background artist goes up and hands him the drink, and they smile and nod. That's called a silent bit.
Is that what people call a featured?
Yeah,
background
featured. It's called a silent bit, bit featured. But then that'd be an extra $50. And then if you worked in smoke, they'd give you a smoke check. Another $20. I remember way back when, if you drove your car and you had your car in a scene, it was $35. What's insulting now? 1980.
Well, a lot of those rates haven't changed.
My God,
right?
that's what I'm saying. I mean, here you are in 220, 40 years later, and I think a car check is $2.50 more than it was when I did it in 1979. So if you think your union is protecting you, I mean, respectfully, factor in the rate of inflation.
Okay, so that brings up an interesting point, because I've been going through the contracts with friends of mine for the last year, and we've been really touching upon this concept of pegging everything in the contracts to scale, because every number that you have that's on its own, like a meal penalty, whatever, if it's not tied to scale, then you have to renegotiate increasing every single independent number in the contract, as opposed to saying, all we need to negotiate is scale, and then everything is some fraction of scale. So a meal penalty would be 10% of scale, or the blah 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 would be 2 times scale or half scale, and it would give us so much more power in our negotiations to do it that way.
But you might want to add the real rate of inflation on that, because, I mean, when you're running things like a car check, if you ran the rate of inflation against the purchasing power of the dollar year on year, I mean, you're going to be getting $250 for a car check, and $500 if it's classic. Why not? Why shouldn't people be making $250 for the car? They say, well, our budgets are so high. Well, how much is enough when you have big films that are, $100 and now $200 million? I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, I believe if people are doing independent productions and they're $1 million and they're $2 million, you can make allowances in those contracts if the background person or the actor wants to work on them. We have contracts now where our rates are less. It should be the same, but it would be at the artist's choice whether he chooses to work on that or not. Also, I've always had an idea for years where we should change our entire model and do profit participation, where the key grip and the cinematographer, every department would have their units, and you could work for a bit less, and then you go with box office breaks. So if the movie makes a lot of money, then there's a bigger stipend paid to each department that's distributed to all the members. It's like taking ownership of your film, because the bottom line is that, like Tom Cruise, when he does a film, smartest thing they ever did is get box office breaks. I mean, how does it benefit the studio if you pay a guy $20 million, the film flops? He still gets his $20 million, goes to the next one, gets another $20 million. So instead of doing that, you're going to say, if I was running a studio, I wouldn't pay an actor more than $5 million. I don't care who he was. I don't care if it's Brad Pitt, any of them. I would not pay anyone more than $5. And I'd say, hey, you share an interest in this. You do the press, I work with the director, work on the screenplay with the writer, make this film the best it can possibly be because it's on your back. Great. So as the film increases in value, as it continues to make more receipts, you get bonuses. And let me tell you, if a film made $100 million and you could lower the budgets going from a cast of paying $65 to $70 million in cast, and instead of doing that, you're paying $10 million in cast if you have a big cast, and then you can afford to pay the other actors more than scale, because it's certainly unfair when you have brilliant actors, and it's like a lot of my friends in The Irishman, Martin Scorsese, all these actors that were on series, highly accredited character actors, they paid them scale, and it's like, oh my God, I'm so happy to be in the film with the great Martin Scorsese. That's unethical. That's treating actors like garbage. But all those character actors in those movies, they make those movies because if those leads don't have anybody good to bounce the ball off of, you're only as good as the tennis player you're playing with.
Yeah. So what happened to Sag?
Well, Sag ended up dissolving. And
Or what,
New York.
1987,
Well, what happened?
1986?
But what happened was New York. New York, it was different because Sag they were a member of SAG. There was a branch, and I don't know that I particularly think that maybe they should have stayed the way they were. They may have had their own individual healthcare system. They could have been better organized.
You think SAG should have stayed on its own?
Yeah, part of me does. Part of me does. I think they should have had their own ship.
Well, because we certainly haven't seen that they've accomplished a whole lot being part of SAG and SAG AFTRA.
Nothing. They have no voice. It's better for them, in my opinion, to be organized on their own, because then they can say, okay, as a matter of collective bargaining, if you want us to do this, we'll get this. But they have to bargain under SAG, and it's like SAG doesn't. I mean, do you think they're going to stand up for extras, wages, working conditions, as opposed to getting bigger things for performers? What's the bigger piece of the pie? We're going to stand for an increase in wages and residuals, but our increase for the background artists will be peanuts or nothing. Or they won't increase any of the jurisdictions. They won't give you one more covered member.
Yeah, talk about that for a second. What is this? Because a lot of people don't know what that means. So background performers are the only performers under SAG-AFTRA that don't have universal coverage across the country, right? They only have union protection in, what is it, a certain number of zones.
Yeah.
Can you describe what that is?
Well, yes, they're covered in Los Angeles. They have some union background performers in New York, but in places like Atlanta, where they have these huge tax incentives, where there's massive amounts of production, and in New Mexico, where Netflix is gearing up 500 productions, and they've taken over market share bigger than Disney, which they are now our largest employer. There's no background jurisdiction, which means it's all non-union work. You see, if our union, in my opinion, they made a mistake. They should have bargained. They should have stood for union coverage in New Mexico and in Atlanta. And it's a right to work stake. And it's different when it's a right to work state, because the state labor laws they permit by law that you don't have to be in a union to be employed. In other words, unlawful if they say you can't work because you're not in a union. But the only way to deal with that is you'd have to file a petition with the NLRB if you get enough background people.
What's the NLRB?
The National Labor Relations Board.
And what does the NLRB do?
Well, it's a protective body to protect the rights, issues, wages, working conditions of labor,
So
of people that are under union contracts.
Under the Federal Department of Labor, right?
Yes, under the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor, the DOL, Department of Labor, yes. But the NLRB is a good body, but a lot of people didn't take the initiative to do that, because if you want to get involved, you can't just say, hi, oh, they'll do it. They're not doing it. Our leadership isn't doing anything. But most people go, I like our president. We like him or we don't like him. He's not doing anything. Oh, my congressman, he sucks. Or all of this complaining, the bottom line is human beings should be the governor of their own universe. In times of trouble, even under the Constitution, every citizen in the United States should be acting as the president. They should be acting as they would the president and governing themselves.
Well, there's the concept in the United States of every citizen being a sovereign. Every citizen has got unalienable rights, and that they cannot be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process. And we all exercise the right to vote, which is executive power over our elected leadership and all of that. So each of us really are, at least in this country, treated with the same respect as anybody who's in office or any other king or queen.
Well, sure, it's your sovereign right to also engage in the pursuit of happiness. And what's troubling now during this lockdown, the mayor of California and the governor, when they try to say that you need to be locked down and you can't walk on the beach by yourself. If you're walking on the beach by yourself, you're certainly not going to infect anybody, nor are you endangering anyone. You're just exercising your sovereign right to walk peacefully on the beach. Now, they arrested a surfer when this first happened, I remember, in Malibu. That charge would never stick with any constitutional law because it violates your constitutional rights. They can't really tell you if you're walking by yourself, you have to wear a mask or not. Because the bottom line is it's your sovereign right to breathe the air. And if I decide that I don't believe that it's good for my body to wear a mask because I'm not breathing properly and I don't want to breathe my own carbon dioxide in, which weakens my immune system, I'm going to make that decision. If the government was so righteous, why don't they tell people that it's illegal and we're going to fine you if you smoke cigarettes? You can't smoke cigarettes in public because if I get near you, I'm going to breathe that smoke, and that's going to affect my health. Why don't they go and write citations to all the candy stores, to the supermarkets for selling all the poison they do to people with high fructose corn syrup? Why don't they make that illegal? Why don't they make it illegal to sell sugar frosted flakes to children? Why isn't that illegal? Because if the government wants, it's a slippery slope they're talking about.
This has brought up a whole interesting conversation around, what are the limits of personal freedom when they impact other people? And I'm certainly somebody who tends to favor us being having the rights to do whatever we feel we want to do as long as we're not infringing on the rights of anybody else. But now that line is getting blurry, especially with something like this COVID-19 crisis, where people are making the argument that, you going out and doing something is potentially going to impact other people. And so that there has to be a different, standard now for personal freedom versus being part of a society, being part of a civilization. Which I think would be it's going to be an interesting conversation to see play out here in the country. But returning back to the topic at hand, so I want to bring back something that you said earlier. Is it something that I can't remember if you told this to me before or whether someone else told me, but you brought up Tourette Syndrome. So tell me about that. First, because I have a couple of questions. One is is it something you're born with? When did you figure out that you had that?
I had symptoms when I was 7, and nobody knew what it was. They actually, at one point, wanted to get me an exorcism. They thought I had some demons. Yeah.
Were you raised in a Catholic family?
Yeah. So at 14 years old, my cousin was a chiropractor in New York, and he gave my dad an article from a guy named Gilles de Tourette, and it was about these symptoms. And we read it, and it described everything I had. So I went to the City of Hope Medical Center, and so I had geneticists there, and he said, "You have Tourette syndrome." I was so happy, because my dad didn't. It was tough for me when I was a kid because my dad just thought I was fucking yelling and screaming and doing all these things, and I could control it.
What were the symptoms that you were
Oh,
having?
you know, I had some tough ones. I mean, the definition is a biogenetic neurological disorder that causes an excess amount of dopamine to go off in your brain and your neurotransmitters misfire, causing uncontrollable urges within your synapses within your body, and thought patterns. It's the best way to describe it for me is like there's a radio in my head, and all the frequencies are jammed, so I get all the signals at once. But these are urges. It's that your body doesn't move by itself. It's like you had the most horrible, huge itch to scratch on your face, and your hands were tied behind your back, and you couldn't do it. You're just boom, and then when you release the urge, then the movements come. But it's an interesting phenomenon because medication for this is pretty severe, and they gave me some for 3 weeks when I was a kid. It's called haloperidol, horrible stuff. And me from being such an athletic kid, I was sitting on the couch drooling, and it was really hard for me to breathe. It was like,
What, it just like made you a zombie or something?
Yeah, and I was really, I felt it was so devastating. I told my mother I wouldn't take it anymore, and she ended up flushing it down the toilet because I said I'd rather move than this than feel like this. It's not good. But the beauty of this is that I went to a cognitive study in New York 2 years ago that was dealing with an experiment on dealing with 10 different people that had Tourette's, and we all had it pretty severely. And out of 11 people, 10 got rid of about 95% of their symptoms. I'm about 80%, but I was the oldest one there. I've had it.
This was just 2 years ago?
Yeah, because it made a profound difference I mean, I could show you videos of me before, and it was so uncomfortable. In school, it was so uncomfortable. In classes, I mean, I could barely. I mean, I did anything I could to get out of the room, go to the bathroom, walk around. In college, I used to pace the back of the room and just take notes. I used to pace. They're teaching. I used to get up, I'd walk around and write in my notebook.
Just because sitting still was so hard?
Tough, yeah. I mean, I remember at the time getting a B average, and I never took home a book. If I took home a book, I'd have got all A's. But I.
Is that also why you got into athletics too? Because it allowed you to get that energy out?
That was a brilliant release. I mean, getting out. I mean, Jim Eisenreich has Tourette's. He was a professional baseball player, and there's a lot of people. There was a goalie, I think, for Man United, big ass-kicking dude, played goalie. I can't remember his name, but he has Tourette's, and he had a lot of press and did a lot of good charity for people as well. But there are some phenomenal individuals. They think Beethoven had Tourette's as well. And but on the other side, it's kind of like Rain Man. You have, they called it a disability, but there's many other abilities, because the ability to focus when you have Tourette's is incredible, because if you had to play baseball and hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, you have to just be like a laser beam. Or if you're acting, when you walk out on a play going, bah, 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 and all of a sudden, oh, action. And then you're, James, you come in, you're James Bond again. But the focus is good, so it enables you for shorter periods of time to have incredible focus.
And how is that manifested for you?
Well, when I want to learn something, it's like being in college. I can retain and read a lot, because when you learn, if you're learning something that has a profound effect on your life, if it was finance and you wanted to learn, I can move money across in trading platforms and understand how the real estate market works and understand how this monopoly board works, and you can actually profit by it. Or you're studying nutrition and you're thinking, if I understand these particular things, I won't have to depend on the word of people who don't, or doctors who are not trained in it, and go back to nature and go back to listening to how your body works, and then studying that. There's great wealth in that, because all of the medicines from the world are really from nature's pharmacy, which is the Amazon rainforest. And Big Pharma gets their drugs there, or gets the compounds from their drugs there. Then they patent it instead of just opening it up and sharing it with the world, because in our interdependence, like Nikolai Tesla, if he created free energy, instead of doing that, they destroyed everything because they wanted to charge money for it. But people are waking up. The one good thing about this forced meditation, I call this lockdown of forced meditation, is people are finally waking up to the fact that there's no wealth in the material. It's only the spiritual. I mean, if you can't eat dollars, and no matter what, if you're not free to roam around and pursue what makes you happy, with the sovereign right to do what you wish, I mean, this world will change, drastically. And the bottom line is the food supply. We have to start getting more conscious about destroying the rainforests, which are the lungs of the planet and provide in between 20 to 21% of the precipitation that travels around the globe by way of atmospheric rivers. And that's the most important issue I believe that we're facing as a race today, which needs to be spoken by. I mean, the only guy that said it was a guy named Tom Steyer from California, who's a billionaire environmentalist. Marianne Williamson was also speaking about it. But when you get caught up in politics, they have to stop with this, Republican stuff, and one side hates the other. You have to be very careful, because it stops you up from stilling your mind and taking a journey on the inside and getting connected with your Creator and all beings. Because when you do that, you understand that we are connected, and if our ecosystem continues to get destroyed, we might have 100 years left, maybe, of food and water that would circulate, because the Atlantic Ocean provides precipitation. That precipitation then gets breathed in by the living, breathing rainforest, and through its leaves, it throws out massive flying rivers, miles and miles wide, that were much larger than any river on the Amazon on the ground. And those rivers are now getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And if they ever become extinct, we have less than 100 years. So that is my focus in this life.
Yeah. Well, so just finishing up on the Tourette's part of it, because I think it's such an inspiration to other people who may have a similar, you call it a syndrome, Tourette syndrome?
Yes.
Yeah. So, or that neurological condition, which is, you have accomplished so much as a performer in this business, even having that syndrome. How do you feel like it's been a challenge for you, or do you feel like it hasn't much been an issue for you? Like, how has it affected your pursuit of your artistry?
It was a challenge when I first started trying to get an acting agent. They thought I was on cocaine and all this shit. Fuck you, I'm not on cocaine. It's very difficult. I mean, doing stunts was a beautiful thing, because the community is like a bunch of professional athletes. It's like being on a football team or a track team. I mean, you got quirky people from all over the world with crazy athletic ability, learning, teaching each other our strengths and specializing in things that we do best, and then learning the other things to the best of our ability. It's really like a great fraternity of camaraderie across the globe, which I appreciate being a part of.
Because it's a small community too, right?
It's getting larger, but it's a smaller community. I probably would think that, in our union, I think there's maybe 3,400 that are registered as stunt people across the United States. I think maybe 1,000 of them make a living. Maybe 300 to 400 make quite a lot of money. But the other people are, they're still doing well. But the business is shifting, because no one is expendable. And what happens on the film sets, the biggest issue with action on film, or the biggest qualification for a stunt coordinator to have, bar none, is the backbone and the intelligence to say no. Because if some big producer or big director is yelling and screaming, we have to get this shot now, or the producer, we have a budget, all this garbage, and they're shooting actors for dialogue for 11 hours, all of a sudden they want to do some high-level pieces of action in 2 hours, and that coordinator has to say, we'll do it when we are prepared to do it. And when we get prepped up, we may get one shot, we may not. And if we don't, we'll do it tomorrow morning. That's it. Or this is unsafe. This wasn't prepped. You're throwing this curveball at me now. If in order for me to make this happen, we have to prep it properly to make sure people are safe. If you can't do that, I don't care if you can jump a motorcycle 200 feet or fall 200 feet from a building. That doesn't make you a coordinator. A coordinator has to have an eagle eye, calm view, and understand the big picture, and understand how it is to make a film, both to write and produce and direct those actions, and understand how all the departments work, from the grips, the effects, to the DPs and the camera department and the rigging. And you have to oversee this and know what it takes to prepare, and then be prepared, and then execute. And don't let anybody come off your game.
Yeah, from learning about the different member categories in our union, found there's some similarities between the stunt community and the dancer community, and even the singers and recording artist community, because actor performers, principal performers, we get agents or we submit ourselves, and so that's how we get connected with work. It was real news to me that there wasn't that same kind of structure in the stunt community. And dancers, some of them have representation, but a lot of times the choreographers are the ones that are choosing who to include for dance jobs. In the singer world, it's the vocal contractor, and then in the stunt community, it's the stunt coordinator. And I think you're the one who taught me this, that there is actually no training program or any accreditation that can tell you that this is a qualified stunt coordinator. So it ends up being a relationship game where people learn who the safe stunt coordinators are that have that approach that you talk about. And those stunt coordinators know the stunt performers they can rely on that are good at specific types of stunt work, have those specialities. So it's definitely a relationship business, and who you know, and trying to hustle and go to sets and introduce yourself to stunt coordinators. When I heard that stunt performers have to go crash sets to talk to the stunt coordinators, I thought that's got to be a lie. That's got to be crazy.
That's how I started. That's why I took I should make up things to get on the lot at Universal. I had a meeting, this, that. I just whatever you can to get on the lot. And that's how you did it. You had to meet them and hustle them. And a lot of them were very kind. I mean,
that's what they call it. They call it the stunt hustle.
A hustle, and that's the way you got work. And the people, some of the coordinators used to get annoyed, but they should remember where they started. They should remember that they had to do that, and again, be humble and be kind. But it is true that a director can hire a guy that works as a crew chief at McDonald's, and you can he's a stunt coordinator the next day. There's no qualifications. Anybody can hire anybody. It can be nepotistic.
Why is that the case when the stakes are so high?
Well, it's just pure ignorance. It's just ignorant. The bottom line is that you can't be a rocket scientist unless you understand math theory. Now, in order to understand math theory, you would have had to go through, algebra, trigonometry, calculus, statistics. You have to go all the way up the ladder and pass all those courses. So in our business, there should be an apprenticeship program where people would get paid to be on the set, put in a program where we can do that. The problem with our union is it's too bureaucratic. And if I could just do it direct and cut through the bureaucracy, Conrad Palmisano tried to do it 30 years ago, and we couldn't get it passed. It was supposed to be a rating system, like you'd have a system if there'd be A, B, and C. If you start out, you're an apprentice. You can work for any stunt coordinator that'll hire you. You can learn, certain things, and they can hire you. If you're a second-tiered guy, you can work for any coordinator. And if you were coordinating yourself, you could coordinate yourself because you're responsible. But if you wanted to go to the top tier, you'd have to go through an apprenticeship program and understand at a deeper level and have enough time on the set and enough experience from doing different pieces of action that you would understand the responsibilities of safety for cast and crew and stunt people, and creating and developing all of the action design on an entire television series or a film. And that still needs to be done. I mean, we just implemented a 500 days to be on SAG-AFTRA's list. I mean, really, it's got no teeth in that deal, and it's meaningless because no producer is going to hire you because looking off a SAG-AFTRA list. Nobody. You know, we all have our own relationships. They're going to go, oh, he's got 497 days, or this guy's got his 500 days, so he's on SAG's list. It's just a list. The only reason I supported it is because we needed to get something in the play, because there's not one safety provision written in the collective bargaining agreement, not one. It's not even required for an ambulance to be on set when there's a major stunt going on. There's not an ambulance required or an EMT required on a set at all times. You usually have set medics. An EMT should be on the set at all times. I don't care, because there's things happen. Sometimes a crew member will get in an accident. Something goes on where you'd need someone with that level of experience. But it's actually unconscionable when you don't have an ambulance on the set, when you're doing, even things that you think might be minor. Oh, we're falling 15 feet over this balcony onto these boxes.
But every minute counts if something goes wrong.
Oh, yeah, I've been witness to that, and there's been people that have died because they haven't had access to ambulatory care, quickly. So these things have to change, and I think that our department at the national stunt and safety level and the local are doing a bit of a better job. And it's sad to say, the only reason that national is getting any traction is because the chair is friends with Gabrielle Gutierrez, the president, and is more supportive of her political views, and she brings him in to help out. But if the chair,
who's the national chair?
His name is Court Hessler. He's a well qualified. He coordinates a TV series called Blacklist in the TV world. In the TV world. But it's sad that I have to say that, because if I have a brilliant idea, it's not going to be heard. But Court is correct in saying this, that he can move more issues forward because of his position, and he's using it to do so. Now we just have to upgrade what we've started to make it a legitimate apprenticeship program, because respectfully, the argument on the other side, the deaths on the set have been on the A-list coordinator's watch. A-list, plenty of experience. But respectfully, they didn't say no. And if they would have said no, these people would have been alive. And that's all the coordinators down the line. The assistants, the second unit directors, you have to have the balls and the courage and the backbone to say, I don't feel comfortable doing this.
Now, here's an interesting topic that I think is great, because certainly, nobody would say that Pete Antico doesn't have courage. You've stood up and spoken your mind in countless union meetings and gatherings, and even if it's not, pleasant for people to hear you speak, what you say, standing in your truth and speaking your mind. So the question becomes, why is it that so many people, I mean, I'm sure this is a broader conversation about our public, in general, but why are so many people fearful to stand up for what they believe is right? I have been personally experiencing now over the last couple of years that for whatever reason, so many people, performers, even member leaders, are just afraid to speak up for what they know or what they believe to be right. Why is that? Where did all this fear come from?
In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. The issue is that when you stand and speak the truth, you're speaking truth to the illusion of power. And if it's not the way the mainstream is going, I'll give you the best example I can think of. if you're in a sound sleep and somebody wakes you up abruptly, what does that do to you?
Shakes you.
Get annoyed, though, don't you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when people are sleeping and you wake them up,
Mm-hmm.
the first reaction is to get annoyed until they think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they keep looking and listening to what someone is saying. And even though a lot of people want to discount it, just like they do now, and Democratic and Republicans, though Trump said this, Schiff said that, and then both sides go off equally. They get angry equally. So what's the truth? So if somebody wanted to be controlled, it's very simple. All I know is they have to say that to that group or this to that group, and they all react the same way. So that's what really being controlled is. I mean, they think they're free, but that's really slavery.
Right, because they're not feeling free to speak their mind regardless of how it's received by, a group that they want to fit in with.
Well, two things. If I like chocolate and you like vanilla, I don't have the right to degrade or attack your being, your divinity, and you don't have the right to attack mine. But what happens in the country is that if you like Trump and you like the Democratic side, both those sides are basically F you, well, you're an asshole, and you're an asshole. But really, they have to understand the practice of energy and frequency. Because if I'm putting out, if I can't speak against your position, I'm not speaking against you. And I've spoken out against the actions of our union of Gabriela Gutierrez many, many times of the structure. I will not speak out against her being. Her being is still divine. But if I can attack her policies all day long.
Yeah, I make the same distinction when I write, things to the members where I say I'm only speaking about anybody with regards to their union position. I'm not commenting on them as human beings. I'm not commenting them as artists, as people. They're all probably loving mothers and sisters and moms and, I said that, like daughters, etc. It's like, yeah, I don't know a lot of these people personally, but I know them in the context of their union activities. And so that's what I can comment on. And that's what I try to frame and constrain my comments to that portion of their lives. But it's very hard for people to do that, for people to perceive that you can be critical of them in one aspect and that you're not commenting on their entire life.
Well, let me correct you. You're not critical of them. You're critical of their actions.
That's right.
So and because frequency is a mirror, the frequency that you put out, it shall return unto you. So when Robert De Niro stood up and said "F you, Trump," he's really saying "F you, Bob," because because the bottom line is he's attacking a part of his own consciousness. He's attacking himself. When you speak unethically about someone, you're really speaking unethically about yourself. It's like you can't tell me people haven't been in a position where they love their wife or their girlfriend to so much, and then they get in a big fight and they call them all kinds of dastardly names. And it feels horrible, even though you're angry, it feels horrible because you're calling somebody that you love and cherish those names. So you're really calling yourself the same. Because if you're with somebody that are the diabolical things that you're describing, what does that make you? A person that accepts and lives in that same diabolical morass of actions. It's a very touchy thing going on, and that's why this lockdown, or this meditation as I call it, is an opportunity for people to keep reading about what their government's doing, keep reading about what their union is doing, and make a decision about what's best for you as a sovereign being. Because I don't believe in fear mongering. Every 5 minutes they're saying somebody died, but they're not giving you the facts of what the reason is, how they died, where they died, what were the circumstances, and how does that compare to the 620,000 people who died last year of hospital air and prescription drugs alone? And why don't they call that a pandemic? And how about the 584,000 people that die from heart disease? I would say that would be a pandemic. Or the 574,000 people that die of cancer. Why isn't that a pandemic? And in H1N1, no one wore a mask. That was a pandemic. Dr. Fauci said in the AIDS epidemic, when that first started, that 20 million people would die of AIDS by the year 2019. 20 million. How much of that has come true? Maybe 1/10. So if you really want to pay attention to history, pay attention to the leading experts. So what is an expert? An expert is a human being with a beautiful mind that understands how to research and look at statistics. And you could read them. And then you could gather the information together, make up your own mind, and do what's best for you and your family.
Well, how did you end up in this position of being outspoken within the union? Like, how did that begin for you? Because my first introduction to you was, I don't know, four-ish years ago, something like that. And I remember, I think it was around the time you were running for president of SAG-AFTRA. And I had seen some of your videos, and we joke about it now, but I wrote you a message because I saw one of your videos and I thought it looked really like Gothic, like Transylvania, and you had this like intense suit. I can't remember, what did I call it? Like a
Cheap suit or something.
I don't think I called it cheap. It just felt like Dracula or something. I can't remember. And you're like, this is a $2,000 Italian suit. But then it opened the door for us to communicate, and since then I've gotten to know you in the context of our service to the union. And I just want to say, just for everybody listening, how much I respect and honor you for all of your years of service, how much you put your money where your mouth is, the time that you spend, the care that you take, how much you care about this union. I mean, certainly I want to get into why the hell do you care so much? But the other part of that is like, how did you get into service and become this kind of outlier, this person who's constantly speaking up about things?
I mean, through my travels in the film business, I mean, at an early age, I worked with Steven Spielberg. I worked with John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now, who ended up being a mentor as a writer. He was quite a brilliant mind. I've worked with and doubled Don Johnson, Sylvester Stallone, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro. And to me, I mean, being Italian and Robert De Niro or Al Pacino, two of the most brilliant, celebrated actors in the history of cinema. Respectfully, I mean, there are some brilliant actors from London, Anthony Hopkins, Klaus Maria Brandauer. I mean, there are some beautiful actors. Sir John Gielgud. There's actors all over the world that I love to sit and watch their process. I mean, it's just moving art. I mean, moving pictures, movies is really moving art. So if you had stationary paintings and you just made them move, then you study. I got to see Alfred Hitchcock when I was at Universal when I was 21 in a black suit with a little thin tie all the time. I mean, that's the people I was exposed to. I mean, Doris Day when I was a kid. I mean, the kinds of filmmakers and actors. I watched Bruce Willis go from his TV series to Die Hards to, a film. Arnold Schwarzenegger, John Milius gave him his break in Conan. Nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted Al Pacino in The Godfather. Unproven. And
is that true? Nobody wanted him?
No, nobody wanted him. They didn't want him. Al Pacino was not. Do you think that he was built for that part? They didn't want him for that part. He's got no cue. They wanted a guy that was proven at a box office.
What is Q?
Q, well, a Q, meaning the high. It's a Q. What's your Q? The guy has a 100 Q or a 90 Q, like a Nielsen rating,
Okay, all right, like popularity rating.
Yeah, a popularity rating. But having, I call it getting the osmosis from being around these people and in close quarters and communicating, with them. They're all, they're all very human. And it's not like, you see on TV, Entertainment Tonight's going, oh, my God, and it's this star so-and-so, and it's Brad Pitt, and it's so, and they like oogle. And I have a saying, the only stars are in the sky, with all we have is
What is
leading
that,
actors.
What is that culture of idolizing
Yeah.
people who are in movies or TV shows?
Well, it's
Or just
it's
celebrity
it's-
culture in general.
Well, it's fanaticism, and it's like there's a great movie with Ray Sharkey, who I used to double, who passed away. Rest in peace, Ray. He did a movie called The Idol Maker, which is quite brilliant about that subject, marketing, branding. Because look, you could say if we put you, Sean, in and you worked at a Payless Shoes, and you walked in there and you were selling shoes, it'd be great, and you would ask some pretty girls out when you're there. They most likely wouldn't give you the time of the day. This is just culturally, or some may, but mostly not. All of a sudden, they put you on a billboard with, 4 gold chains. They did your hair, the vest, no shirt, leather pants, and say, the new DJ from so and so, or the new lead in this series. And all of a sudden, everybody go, "Who's that? Who's that?" The reason is because, or same with the rock and roll culture, people want to be with people that they think will maybe raise their profile, or that look at me, I'm with them. So that doesn't give you any power.
Like a trophy.
It's a trophy, but yeah, it is a trophy. It doesn't give you any power. It just means that you're with them, and the old adage with rock stars that used to run through, women, like they do bottles of water. It's like, oh, I get to be with him, but what is the prize? But really, because there's no depth of heart there, and the bottom line is when it comes down to it, virtuous qualities are irreplaceable and priceless. And because you're on a stage for a while, and when you're up there, like your agent's your friend. I remember Burt Reynolds, who was a real mainstay in my career. Burt gave me my first break as an actor. And he was a man's man, a ladies' man. He was so kind. I did a TV series with him in Florida called BL Stryker. And I worked with, I co-starred with Ricardo Montalban when I started acting, and the 2-episode arc I did was with Julianne Moore, playing Ricardo Montalban's assistant before she got, really famous. So every Thursday at 5 p.m., Burt Reynolds, like clockwork, would stop working. He'd go to his theater, Jupiter Theater, and teach kids how to act. And he always gave back. He was one of the kindest, most beautiful human beings, and I call him the godfather of the stunt business, because he did, a movie called Smokey the Bandit and Hooper, and he gave Hal Needham, who was a stuntman, a legendary stuntman, one of the founders of Stunts Unlimited with Glenn Wilder and Ronnie Rondale. He gave him an opportunity to direct, and that was a $7 million budget. It made $150 million way back in the 80s, and that was the first big success story that a stuntman directed a movie that made more money than 90% of the box office. And if you factor in the rate of inflation, it's at least $500 million. Mm-hmm. So that's the gifts of being around some of these people. And Burt Reynolds was loved by everyone. My point is, William Morris, he made 3 bad movies he was just doing with his friends. They dumped him. If you think anybody's loyal to what you are, very few. There are few. But it's all about the money. Oh, he's flying high. Everybody wants you. But when you're not, and you're not bringing in revenue, it isn't. So don't expect a lot of heart. You have to choose, your friends wisely. Meditate. You have to understand that the more we work on ourselves, I mean, acting's a good piece. You get to go through the human condition many times. But the more you still your mind and love the being you are, heal the being you are, forgive the being you are, forgive everyone else, which I learned because from my own spiritual path, 8 years ago, I was pretty angry. I had Tourette's and at a worst case, and when people did things that were wrong, I used to do things incorrectly where condescendingly attack them, which is incorrect. And that's an evolvement of my being. And every human being evolves their own spiritual journey at different times. And I respect all of them. And some of the people that we may battle against in the boardroom, some of the levels of their consciousness is maybe they're a little bit stuck up in their ways, and they haven't realized that there's a much bigger picture.
All right, so let's
outside
talk about
themselves.
that for a second, because you said you've been in service for 10 years, so you've seen this more than 2.5 times the length that I've been involved in union volunteerism. So it's been a shock for me, and it's been something I've been grappling with, and something that I continue to try to work on, is to drive out this kind of partisanship that's in the union, or to see somebody who's let's say ran on a different pamphlet or was part of a different email trying to get elected to be able to serve as somehow now the enemy or the other, or somebody to dehumanize or to attack or whatever. So, I also believe that most people who got involved, let's just say those that are part of political parties or leadership that we may disagree with, I'm sure, I would hope or think that when they first got involved that they were like us. They had ideas, they were idealists, they wanted to accomplish something, they worked very hard to make it happen, and that what has happened in their cases is just now that they've been in power for so many years that they've kind of become what they originally were against. It's like you become the worst parts of your enemy or something. So I guess from your experience, has it always been the same, or have you seen an evolution between the way the union was run and the personalities and these political parties? Like, has it changed over the last 10 years, or has it always been the same battle?
There had been a battle, but it was a bit different because a group of concerned actors went off on their own to try to make sure that they bargained better deals. And though I'd like to think everybody's intention is to do so, but the problem with that is you really have to stand for it. You can have anything in your life you're willing to have stood for having gotten, but if you don't go in there with a strike authorization and say, you either give us a fair and ethical contract based upon the real rates of inflation, based upon the year-end financials for Netflix, Google, Apple, ABC, NBC, CBS, and studying all the metrics of the ad revenue, and then study all the vertical corporations, because there's only 6 major corporations that own every media outlet, like Paramount, Viacom, then from Stars Network. When you really run a guideline through all the media, then you have 6 major corporations that are really negotiating against you under the guise of all these different studios. We're negotiating with Fox, we're negotiating with Universal, and we're negotiating with Sony Pictures Entertainment, MGM, Warner Brothers. It's really not that way, but you have to come down to we're all human beings. Now, I remember during the commercial strike, if they didn't honor their labor agreement, it would hurt a lot of commercial actors and deprive them of qualifying for health care. Now, if you're in California and you call yourself a liberal and you have a company in New York and Los Angeles, and you're saying that you don't want to honor your contract, and it could throw 20,000 people or more off of health care, and then you bang the drum and say, I support universal health care. No, you don't. You don't, because would you want your family not to be protected? So, within our contracts that we're dealing with, one of the biggest things that I fought for is pension equality. And if our members really knew how they were getting screwed in their pension, they would storm 5757.
So tell them, what are you talking about?
Well, our pension, our Screen Actors Guild pension plan was founded, and it was only, the participants were only the members of the Screen Actors Guild. In I think 2001 or 2001 it started, but 2004 was the year that we decided to save money, and so we put the staff on the Screen Actors Guild pension and health plan.
How did that save us money?
Well, because they had their own plan, and they said, well, if we put them on our plan and swallow them up on our plan, then we wouldn't have to pay so much out of pocket for their plan.
To like a third party, external party.
Yeah. And originally, it was a bit equal, and our accrual rates were 3.5%.
What does accrual rate mean? Because people talk about accrual rate all the time.
Okay.
What does that actually mean?
Accrual rate means this. you first have to start with a pension cap. A pension cap is $225,000 per employer for SAG members. That means if I work for 5 different studios and I make, I'll just use the figure of $200,000 for mathematical ease, that's $1 million in earnings. Now, the pension, the accrual rate was 3.5%. So, I mean, your pension would accrue at that rate. So on $100,000, that's $3,500. On $200,000, that's $7,000. So that's how much money would be put into your pension
so if
on a
you
yearly
earn
basis.
$200,000 from 5 different studios in a year for $1 million.
Yeah.
At 3.5%, that means you would earn $35,000
That's
towards your pension.
Correct.
What does that mean? Does that mean that $35,000 is put in a bank account somewhere and that it earns interest, or does it mean that you get $35,000 a year for the rest of your life when you retire?
Yeah, it does. So well, they put it in a holding company in the pension. And obviously, our pension is subsidized, and until you're, let's say, at full retirement at 65, that money that you earn goes in and pays other people that are retired. It's a subsidized plan. And we have
So it isn't like just an account for yourself. It goes into a big fund.
Correct. It's not an RSP. An RSP is different. RSP accounts.
What does that mean?
RSP is a different kind of a program. It's a program where when you start working in a company, any money you earn, whether it's $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, goes into an account specifically earmarked for you. It's your personal account. They do that in Canada.
Is that like a 401k or something?
Similar.
Yeah.
It's a retirement account, but it's put in an account for you. No one else can touch that. It's not a defined benefit plan. So that means if you worked and you made 10 or 20 or 30, that money just goes to you, as opposed to our plan. If you make under the qualifying amount for the pension, which has been 20, so if you made $19,000, your $19,000 would just go into the pot, and it would be used to pay
to subsidize other people.
Yeah.
But yeah. So even if you earn $19,000, and then the union the producers have to contribute 18 cents on every dollar towards pension and health, right? And so that doesn't go towards you.
Nope.
You didn't qualify that year, so all of that pension and health contributions is just going to support other members who are qualified.
Correct. And there's something that's called low breakage when you make under. Now there's some people that make over. They have one employer, they work on a TV series, and they make $500,000, and the max is $225,000. So
the employer doesn't have to pay 18 cents on every dollar above $225,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
They do not. So it's and the high breakage means that they don't. Let me make it easier by they don't have to pay it on that's on TV. That's the max they pay, and then they're done. So
yeah, because I was talking to a friend of mine who I won't say his name for the moment, but one of the most successful performers in television who we serve with in leadership, and he told me just a couple of weeks ago that he doesn't qualify for SAG-AFTRA health insurance because the residuals he's earned on all the TV shows that he did all exceeded that $225,000 cap a long time ago. So even though he's getting paid, for those, they don't count towards his pension and his health. What is that called? That's called, is that your pension caps, or what is that called?
Well, they're
or pension employer contribution caps.
Employer contribution caps. And so if someone's making over $225,000, that's called high breakage, or all the people that, let's say you worked for 5 years and you made $10 million and you already maxed out on your pension, which means you've earned the maximum amount of money to get the maximum a maximum pension amount. And
which right now is $96,000 a year.
Right, $96,000 a year, and you keep working. All that money you earn, it's called high breakage. That goes back into the plan.
It's just supporting other people. It's not going to help you earn anymore.
Nope. It does not.
What's a defined benefit plan? So that means like that. Explain what that is.
Well, a defined benefit is there's two kinds: a defined benefit plan and a defined contribution plan. A defined benefit plan means you actually have you earn money through your earnings the more you earn, there's a defined benefit, like you have that 18%. It's a defined benefit for a certain amount of earnings. It's not a defined, in other words, you're not putting any money into it. A defined contribution plan would be on the money that I earned, a certain amount of my earnings goes into my plan, and I am contributing to that plan. A defined benefit plan is when the employer solely contributes to your plan based upon your earning amounts. So we have a defined benefit plan that's called a multi-employer plan. It's not a public pension plan, which
What does that
respectfully,
mean? What's the difference between a public and a multi-employer?
well, a public pension plan is funded by the U.S. government.
Got it.
It's federally funded. Ours is a private pension. The SAG pension is a private pension, and you're getting the benefit of the employer contributions from many different employers, NBC, Fox, Paramount, many different employers. And as long as your pool of employers are big conglomerates that aren't going out of business, it's pretty good. It's a pretty safe plan. However, in this environment, the reason I've been such an advocate is because since 2011, when Gabriel Contreras' political party took over, in 2011 and 12, when they controlled the contract negotiations, our pension funding ratio was within 0.5% for 3 years until 2014. And in 2014 to 2020, in the midst of a 320% stock market boom, the biggest in the country's history, our pension plan funding ratios went down 1.5% to 2% per year, which evidences poor contracts, poor residual negotiations, and contract giveaways. And then the thing that's so disconcerting to me is that every time we negotiate a contract, the leadership, this is unprecedented, it's a historical deal. Last year's deal was worth $200 million, and this year's is $250 million. But what they're not telling you is that 13 presidents of the biggest media corporations made $260 million collectively between 13. And they're also not telling you that you have to factor in the rate of inflation on that contract, because no contract can be a gain unless the purchasing power of the dollars that are allegedly gained can purchase more goods and services than the contract terms in the 3 years previous. So right now we're negotiating a contract at 220. So let's say our contract was 200 million last year, and we get 250. The purchasing power of the dollar 3 years ago, up all the way up to now, because of the rate of inflation, goods and services cost more things. Cost of tuition, the cost of food, the cost of gasoline.
So how much did we really gain, if anything?
Yeah, because if those basket of commodities, went up 8%, because people don't understand. A lot of people factor in the rate of inflation by the government, that normal federal 2% a year, but they don't calculate it correctly because they back out food and energy. We eat food every day. We have gasoline, oil, electric, natural gas, and
so you have to
food.
use something like the Consumer Price Index or something.
Yeah, the CPI is the Consumer Price Index. You have to really run it against orange juice, milk, eggs, lean hogs, across the gamut. Some are up 2%, some are 8%, some have been 15%. Soybeans a year went up 22%.
Yeah.
So if you're running that and you're putting products in food to get a true economic number, and the truer number, in my opinion, would be closer to 7%. But if you want to factor that in, to that, you really earn. I mean, I believe in the last contract we earned nothing because the rate of inflation ate up any alleged gain they got. Because this is a trick, a sleight of hand. You can't tell people it's groundbreaking because the value in dollars is worth more. You have to understand it's what the value of those dollars. That's the key. It's not I just got a $50 raise. Well, if the rate of inflation has eroded that $50, so I can't buy as much or only buy the same goods and services with that dollar as I could before. How's that a gain? It's not. So
let me ask you this question then. Why is it when we have a union, when we employ so many staff, when we have been around for 90 years as the Screen Actors Guild and now SAG-AFTRA, so much time, energy, money is spent. Why isn't our union more effective at making sure our pension plan is well funded, or that we get really great working conditions and compensation? Why is it that we have seen a decrease in our ability to make a living as opposed to it being preserved or even being enhanced with all this money and time that we're spending supporting an organization that's supposed to fight for those things?
Well, our system is broken, and respectfully, we have a lot of actors running our union who have no expertise or no training or no education in economics, finance, nor corporate business governance. And then you have staff people who are supposed to be, it's in the legal structure of a member-run union, which we are supposed to be.
Why have a member-run union? Why not just have a staff-run union? What do we gain by having a member-run union?
You have a member-run. The gain of a member-run union is how it in its original intent by Jimmy Cagney, because actors know what terms and conditions are best for actors. Now, in the spirit of that, if they actually stood for that, that would be great. But the problem is when you get to the upper level and you get to negotiations, you're negotiating against multi-billion-dollar corporations. Now, respectfully, what is Gabriel Kateris or any of those people are going to do sitting there against people that are from Harvard, Yale, in the field of negotiation and corporate structure? If they had a backbone to say, no, I'm sorry, we won't accept that, and they knew the power they had, and they actually joined with the Writers Guild, they actually stood side by side with them because their contracts have been in regard to their packaging fees, which there's no law in California about packaging. And respectfully, the agency law says you only can take 10%, but there's no language for packaging. But I mean, in any other business, it would be flat out extortion. But the actors now have an opportunity to stand with those writers because our contract now will be, with their writers extension, will end at the same time. And if we stood with the writers and actually negotiated a fair residual package, because a directors guild, they got a 50% increase in streaming, that goes to one person, a director. If we got that, it could go to 20 to 50 to 100 people. That doesn't do anybody any good. I mean, we would need a 4 or 5 or 100% increase in residuals to make a dent in it.
What you mean by that is, like, it goes to one person. They may have negotiated a 50% increase, but that's the director's cut that goes up by 50%. But when in SAG-AFTRA, even if they increase the residuals by 50%, it's spread out amongst so many performers that we actually see very little increase in our own individual checks.
Correct. That's why writers' residuals, usually they have 1, 2, or 3 writers on a project. They get a big residual because it's as if they had to split it between 50 people. And it would be much less.
You would think that the residuals for the performers whose likeness is being used out there should get at least as good of a residual as any director or any writer when it's our faces that are out there that are being monetized.
Sure, but there's a difference between the DGA is a very well-oiled machine. It's very well structured.
Well, why isn't SAG-AFTRA a well-oiled machine?
The difference is when you have actors and who are great human beings, there are some that are very, very, very educated. But when you're dealing with people that are writing and they're dealing with, I call it a much more intellectual study. I mean, to be a good writer, both in grammar and in story, you have to have a higher level of education. No, respectfully, a lot of actors are really well educated in English and went to Yale and Harvard and UCLA. They're also very, very, very educated. But the thing is that I have found that most the writers and directors, because they're dealing with the upper echelon or the highest earners in our business, and they've always dealt directly with corporations hand in hand to release their products, because directors work hand in hand with them. Actors only the leads do when they do press tours. But if you get a director can forge corporate partnerships with many, many different businesses. But their leadership has been calm and pragmatic, and because you're dealing with a lot of production managers, and what they do, production managers allocate money. They do budgets. They're used to doing a lot higher levels of business, where actors, you're not going to get an actor to do a budget.
So you're saying that the reason our union isn't as effective is because we have a lot of people in leadership, and have had a lot of people in leadership, that just aren't qualified to go toe-to-toe with the best and brightest minds that represent our employers.
Correct. And that would be okay if they actually hired a legal team to negotiate, like the DGA does. I mean, they're very bright, but they hire a legal team to negotiate.
Why haven't we addressed that issue? Is it because it's hard to challenge the egos of people in leadership, that they may not be qualified or the most effective people to go and advocate on their behalf? Is it an overinflated sense of their own capacity?
Funny, I just got intuition before you started speaking to say humility comes into this. You have to be humble enough to know to pass the torch on to somebody that could do this better than you. If I was president of SAG-AFTRA, that was one of the platforms that I ran on. If I negotiated, though I have a good economic background, I would hire a team of lawyers that does this for a living, with high levels of education. And then I would bring in, I would call the brightest minds that I could find in SAG-AFTRA in all of their fields to negotiate it. And even if I disagree with their ideology, if they're brilliant and they understand their business impeccably inside and out, I would bring them in to consult in their area. If it was a broadcaster or a dancer, it's not about whether I agree with their ideology. I would want to know that they would be able to best serve the contract, which would be the highest good for all the members in that particular category. And then you go to the best interest of the general welfare of the entire membership.
Yeah, why did you run for president? So you ran for president in the year 2017. Yeah, not in 2015 or 2013?
No.
Yeah, so what was behind your desire to run for president in 2017?
I was involved in a group, Membership First, and
how did you get pulled into that group?
There was an actor starred in Adam 12 named Kent McCord, and he was really very, very bright and had a strong backbone.
I've gotten to know Kent. He's awesome. Yeah,
and he was, he was so. I mean, he respectfully saved most of my pension because they were trying to merge the pension in 2003 or 2004 under, I think, Ed Asner, which I didn't agree with. And if that merger had passed, I've really shudder to think what would happen, because my earnings would have been split. Because what a lot of people don't realize, under the merger agreement, a normal merger of two unions, you have to do in-depth financial comparisons, which are called really impact studies, where you take 3 to 5 years of the tax returns, match them against all the accounts payable and receivable, look at their banking records to make sure it matches, look at their tax returns. It's a full audit. It's not a surface audit. And after doing that, you have to then decide how this merger the structure of one business will merge with the other. Will it be a value add? And if not, if it's a detriment, how long will it take to become a value add? And if it's negative or it takes too long, then you have to really decipher based upon information and hard data what the best thing to do is. The thing that was the most nefarious for me about the merger was the pension and health plan, because ERISA law, Employment Retirement Income Security Act, governs pensions. And if one pension, like AFTRA's pension, is so financially in structure different than SAG's pension, ERISA law will not allow them to merge, because one would deminimize the other greatly. And the thing that people need to realize is that AFTRA's pension plan, their accrual rate is 0.86. The cap is $200,000 per year, period. If they worked for 10 different employers and made $6 million, they would only get $1,720. That's the max they would get per year. Now, the SAG person, he worked 5 and he made $1 million. You're talking $7,000 every 200,000. That's again $35,000 you could max for the year. It's a highly superior plan, and the bottom line is, because they merged it, only doing a feasibility study instead of an impact study. The in-depth study that I spoke about is an impact study. A feasibility study is along the lines of, it's legal to merge pensions in the United States of America. It is lawful. Some pensions merge successfully, some don't. That's about as legitimate as me saying, well, it's feasible if it's cold outside, you wear a jacket. There's no evidence or no data to go on. So by merging it, we had 2 different contracts. And then they had to rearrange it to keep AFTRA's pension plan afloat, because SAG was still vastly superior. So then they ended up allocating 43% of monies on a certain structure of television and films to AFTRA, and 57% going to SAG
So
to keep
if
them
I'm
afloat.
understanding it correctly, and this is what I've heard over the years, is that, AFTRA was going financially bankrupt. That they were they had a pension plan that was ailing, and that they broke ranks with SAG in their negotiation in 2008, I believe.
Yeah.
Which I remember because I had just joined SAG, in 2007, and it caused. And since they broke ranks with SAG, where they had always negotiated with SAG jointly for that contract, they basically went and undercut SAG in a contract deal with the producers, which caused a flight of TV shows away from SAG contracts to AFTRA contracts, which essentially forced the merger because SAG needed to save its own work and its jurisdiction.
Right, without a unit clarification lawsuit, because there had been 12 lawsuits on jurisdiction between SAG and AFTRA, and the Screen Actors Guild won 9 out of the 12, and President Howard refused to file one, and respectfully, even when Alan Rosenberg was president, I kept asking Kent McCord. I said, what's going on? He says the national board, it's being blocked, and this still bothers me.
You say that's a lawsuit between SAG and AFTRA to clarify their jurisdiction.
Correct. So if AFTRA is taking a TV show, a series that's normally SAG's jurisdiction, you file an action called a unit clarification lawsuit and let the courts figure it out. And had SAG filed that and won, there would be no merger. It'd be because SAG would have just took the jurisdiction, and AFTRA would have went bankrupt.
So was the justification for doing that just a desire to save AFTRA at all costs?
For me, if I was to speculate, it appears something deeper and darker was going on to me, because you have to look at it pragmatically. In AFTRA, in my opinion, from seeing the last Pricewaterhouse audit, I mean, even Jonathan Handel did an article about it and said, they had these fraudulent accounting practices that, if are not addressed, there was a lot of loopholes that could be fraudulent. And then they had 11,000 members listed on their books that didn't exist. So when you're merging and I got 11,000 people, it looks like I got a lot more money coming in. That's basically fraud.
Yeah, that's bigger than the Writers Guild West.
Correct. And then they stated that there was an alleged pension embezzlement. So Duncan Crabtree, the lead counsel at SAG, said, nope, there is nothing wrong. We stand firmly behind Bruce Dow and Karimi Nadar. And that was right when they were trying to push the merger. Well, that was incorrect. There was an FBI investigation. AFTRA had 11,000 members on their books, which was not disclosed to the general membership. If the members would have been apprised that these two nefarious issues were going on, would they have voted up the merger? I don't know. If they were informed that if they did so, that AFTRA would have to, or SAG would have to bail out AFTRA's pension plan, and they couldn't be merged because of ERISA law, and they couldn't merge the health plan in a in a proper manner that would benefit most people. Because I tell you, everybody that's pro-merger, look what happened with the health plan. And Craig Simmons, the whistleblower, his FBI report, because he blew the whistle on Creamy Nader, and he actually said there was much greater than $20 million.
So there
being
was
embezzled.
an actual embezzlement.
There was an embezzlement. Creamy Nader. Here's the weird part about it. He embezzled. They said the amount was $2.5 million, but he said that he didn't pay taxes on kickbacks. He was getting kickbacks $700,000. So he got a $200,000 fine. I read the case. He got a $200,000 fine, and they didn't put him in jail. Now, there was $2.5 million in embezzled. Bruce Dow was caught with about $56,000 of misappropriation of funds, so he paid it back. Nothing happened to him. No jail time for that. But where's the rest of the money? Chubb Insurance paid back the $2.5 million, but they didn't do.
So $2.3 million is just out there and just.
Well, no. He had to pay 200 back.
Yeah.
So
Karimi paid 200 back.
and
Bruce paid 56 back.
Yeah. So
and the union got its insurance to cover the loss, but then there's
where's the rest of the money?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not even that. Where's the rest of the money? Chubb paid it back. But because that was the loss. But according to what the Department of Justice stated. Now, when the Department of Labor does audits, to my surprise, when I had questioned them, they don't do audits forensically. They do only take the statutes of a contract, like the pension, the laws that govern the pension. They'll look for irregularities, and like they found irregularities where our trustees were spending too much money. They had to pay back for $756,000 a couple of years ago that our trustees were caught misappropriating those particular funds. David White said that wasn't true, but the DOL found them guilty of that. Again, insurance paid that back. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. If you're a trustee, and you might as well, go to Hawaii and spend the money, because if you get caught, the insurance will take care of it and nothing will happen. Mm-hmm. Why weren't every one of those people that are trustees fired is what I want to know, because all of them should have been fired. Mm-hmm. And why is there no transparency?
It just seems like, one of the things that I've noticed is that it's so easy to spend other people's money, right? Like if it's not coming out of your pocket and you've got all these dues coming in, you have all these performers who are not engaged in their union, not overseeing anything. There's just such a temptation. It's so easy just to take money, spend money, especially if you don't have to be held accountable. It's kind of like when nobody went to jail for the 2008 economic crisis and all the banks got bailed out. And it's like you're basically saying, we will reward you for being speculative because you won't have to pay any price for that.
Goldman Sachs was shorting the housing market as they were selling their clients long. The SEC caught them. They fined them $500 million, but they profited 1.5. Right. So for their crime, they got paid $1 billion.
Yeah, right. So that's, it seems like in our union, that's a potential risk, is that it's just easy to spend the members' money if you don't have to be held accountable for that. So just to clarify here, so essentially, so it sounds like the idea was to save AFTRA at any cost, no matter how much it cost us. There was, financial, mismanagement. There was embezzlement. Their pension plan was ailing, and then it feels like, and this is what I've heard from others, is that even though SAG was the dominant and most prestigious of the two, that SAG-AFTRA looks a lot more like AFTRA than it does the old SAG. That we've become kind of AFTRAtized. Is that an accurate statement in your view?
It's very accurate, and the thing is that SAG operated fine. Its finances were in much better position.
So
than
why did we
were.
get AFTRAtized? Is it simply because those that successfully got the merger accomplished were more AFTRA friendly, or was it the fact that AFTRA had so many locals around the country that exercised more power over the merger process?
No, there's a misconception in business. A lot of people are always saying stronger together. That's Alexander the Great, or unity and strength in numbers. Alexander the Great would disagree with that statement. He defeated armies that were 10 times larger. Why? Because he had an infrastructure, strategy, and a plan. If you build a house without a foundation, I don't care how many stories it is. It could be a behemoth. It will come crashing down. The mistake they made is exactly that. they don't have a cognitive plan. And again, the actors that have run it have not been held accountable. So how is it that Ken Howard is running the union with Gabriel Gutierrez as one of the hires up, or the executive vice president? How is it that when that happens, and Amy Aquino was the secretary treasurer, they merged, and instead of renting the building that they had at a really reasonable price, that would have been perfect and plenty of space for both AFTRA and SAG in New York to move into, they went out and rented a high-line, hoity-toity address in Lincoln Center, bought $1 million worth of Italian furniture, and then they couldn't sublet the building they were in, costing our members $7 million. Now, if you really think about it, our union could really use that $7 million now in this particular crisis. Not only did they do that, they wasted another $2 million remodeling the 7th floor of 5757 Wilshire, our rented office space, another $500,000 for the James Cagney room in a building that we don't own. And they were attempting to spend $1 million on this podcast studio, but a lot of that may have been on hold. And respectfully, the viewership of the podcast has been maybe 100 people a show, which is not a reason to build a studio. And I said in the boardroom, if you want to spend $1 million, let me go find a building. I'll go find a nice little studio space. You can buy a beautiful commercial spot. So SAG-AFTRA will have it forever. You can have a studio. You can hold get our broadcasters to do a labor radio show. We could create all kinds of things. Self-taping. We could create something that we own.
So why waste that on a rented space?
Respectfully, that's idiotic and ignorant behavior.
But why would they do that?
Because it's like you said, it's being irresponsible. And respectfully, why they would do it, my own guess or intuition would be control. It's idiotic to do what they want to do, because everything that they state they want to do that's benefiting the members have to take a good look at it, because it only appears to benefit their particular political party, and used as a marketing tool to keep speaking about all the good things that they're doing that continually destroy the general welfare of our pension and health and our wages and working conditions. Having segued onto that, I want to read something to you.
Okay. This
is from the contract from 2011 to 2014 that we were negotiating in 2010.
Okay.
Now, since 1947, first-class travel was guaranteed for all principal performers. As of July 1, 2011, all domestic flights 1,000 miles or less will be rolled back to coach. All domestic flights 1,000 or more and international flights will be rolled back to business. It gets worse. International flights to Vancouver and Toronto in Canada under 1,000 miles will be rolled back to coach. First-class international travel between Los Angeles and Vancouver, even though over 1,000 miles, will also be rolled back to coach. 30-mile zone expanded to up to 45 miles. In Los Angeles, where actors used to be paid for their drive time, actors will be required to drive farther to work without compensation. The 30-mile zone has been expanded to 15 more miles to now include Leo Carrillo State Beach, Ontario Airport, Moore Park, Agua Dulce, and all of Castaic, including Lake Castaic, Piru, and Pomona, including Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. 400 to 500 background jobs lost annually. As of July 2011, a new side letter will roll back the number of covered background performers on CW shows. This new side letter, combined with no new numbers in New York, means a net loss of jobs for New York members. 2% increase in our daily minimums. Lowest percentage increase in over 50 years. Pension and health. One-time increase of 1.5% in PH contributions from 15 to 16.5%. What they're not explaining is every pilot presentation in the first two seasons of every one-hour television series produced on or after July 1, 2011, approximately half of our dramatic television will be held at 15%, a discount of 10%. All pilot presentations and the first two seasons of all one-hour series produced prior to July 1st, 2011 will hold contributions at 13.5%. To be clear, the 1.5% increase will not apply to approximately half of all 1-hour scripted dramatic television. No change in decades-old DVD or lower P&H contributions. A 13.5% P&H deduction will continue to be taken out of our residuals, making the residuals even smaller, another area where pension and health wasn't raised. Not accomplished within 7 months prior to contract expiration. No equalization of SAG and AFTRA contracts. AFTRA's minimums are higher than SAG's and will continue to be so for at least another 3.5 years. As of July 1, 2011, AFTRA's daily minimum will be $855. SAG's daily minimum will be $825. New media, more broken promises. No increase in residuals. No elimination of free exhibition windows. No elimination of AMPTP's ability to produce non-union projects. No residuals for pre-1974 television shows streamed in new media. Further erosion in clip consent. Performance capture. No guarantee that unions hired for performance capture work will receive union coverage, i.e. minimums, residuals, pension and health in union productions. Background coverage. No equalization of X1 and X2 terms. LA background numbers are still drastically behind New York background numbers. LA only got 2 more in theatrical and 1 more in television. No increase in background zones. Areas like New Mexico, Chicago, and New Orleans remain non-union for background coverage. Airline pilots, nothing. In fact, our employers say they will cease to pay pension and health contribution to these SAG performers. Stand-ins, employers will be allowed to use stand-ins to do work that should be done by principal performers. This was the information of the contract we accepted that we opposed in 2011. These are just some of the giveaways that this opposition party has dealt. Stunt performers haven't gotten an increase in wages, except for the cost of living, the 2%, in the last 4 negotiations. Nothing. The only thing that we've gotten is a $200 raise in the flat television stunt coordinator contract. Nothing. The background performers, they said they had an increase, but only in CW shows when, respectfully, only 2 CW shows were being shot in the United States. It didn't affect the members here because all the rest were being shot in Canada. So when they're talking about increasing and incredible contracts, we gave away portal to portal. We gave away our travel positions that we've had for 60 years, which means on television, if I flew to Texas to do a show, when I jump on the plane, my contract starts. And every morning when I leave from the hotel, that's when my time starts, and my time ends when I come back to the hotel. Now, it's like you're all working locally. So if I flew to Texas, I would just get a $500 stipend of travel. I'd jump in my hotel room. They'd pick me up for work. I'd go to work. My start time doesn't start until I actually arrive on the set, and my time ends when I end on the set. So if I have to drive an hour to and from, those 2 hours are now eliminated from my weekly contract. And on a normal weekly contract, that could come into between $1,000 and $3,000 per week for a stunt performer and actors. That means you're losing all of that revenue on your pension and health contributions. So these things are addressed. And I'm going to give you one thing that no one's ever heard. There's a term called force majeure. Gabriel Gutierrez and Unite for Strength bargained that away a few years ago. Now, can you believe force majeure was bargained away?
What does that mean?
Force majeure means acts of God. Mm-hmm. We had force majeure in our contract. That means with this shutdown, we'd be getting paid. Because a lot of people have force majeure in their contract. Well, let's get rid of the force majeure terms and the clauses, because it's the same thing that I've been petitioning our union to not pay the rent at our building. Why? Because I believe it's, from my research, it's 70% in default. No one's paying the rent because they can't afford it because there's no business happening. So SAG-AFTRA, they're not working. I mean, our contracts are not working. And most of them, 90% of them aren't. So under the force majeure clause, you don't have to pay your rent. In fact, I would leave that building under those reasons, because it caused irreparable financial damage to our members, our pension and health, and we can't afford to be in that office anymore. And what should happen is they should move out of that building, purchase one. They should purchase their own building. Their rents now with parking is about $6 million a year. They should go and purchase a building and create a mortgage with half of that more amount of payment. It should be $3 million in a building that we own, that we create equity. And in this time, when the commercial market is defaulting and we have members that pay dues, it's not a function. We have dues paying members. And as long as members can continue to pay dues, we can make great deals with moratorium on payments and get something we own. And we should walk away from that building and do things to preserve our members. Because if we don't take cognizant, austerical measures, both in our structure and in regard to protecting our pension and health plan, our union stands a chance of going bankrupt and will have to be reorganized. And the most important thing that should be exposed on this podcast is that our pension contribution caps, let's talk about that, have been the same for 38 years. The contribution caps on television in hour shows are 24,500. I think on TV, half hours, like 15,250 or 500. They've been that way for 30 years, up to the cap of 225,000 per year.
So that's what you were talking about before. That hasn't changed in 38 years. Yeah. 225,000
for television and 232,500 for film. So what I proposed at a meeting, I proposed that we double them. So let's double the caps to 450,000. Let's double it to actually be 460. And then let's double on the television side 450. Because then the employer contributions would be doubled, and then our pensions and our pension plan would immediately go up to 100%. It would protect our livelihoods. And since the 18%, a portion of that goes, a good portion, 60%, close to 60, goes into our health plan, that would again help our health plan, because our health plan lost $50 million last year, and I'm waiting for the paperwork back so I can assess the finances, and I didn't understand how that could happen. On the health report that came out and was sent to the members, it said due to non-performing investments. Well, respectfully, how could you have a non-performing investment when during the time frame that they're talking about, up to January 2020, the market is up 320% since 2009? I don't understand that. See, these are the things that need to be transparent and need to be investigated.
Okay, so a couple things, and then we're almost at 2 hours, so I want to be, respectful of your time, and I teach actually in a half hour too. But I mean, I knew this would just be a starting point conversation to get people curious, for people to meet you, learn about you, and to begin the conversation. So, but a couple things that I'll ask you is, why do you care so much? Why are you so involved?
I'm a kid that had Tourette's that everybody thought would have no chance at life. I jumped in this business, and this union enabled me to travel around the world, be accepted by humanity, create a fraternity of brothers and sisters who love me, and to see it torn down by people that may well have good intention. But that refuse to honor the truth in the pursuit of self-serving, disingenuous illusion of power is heartbreaking. And all of them should be held accountable for the damage that they have caused the members of this union. The other thing that is most important is that the leadership is a mirror of the consciousness of the people who elect them. The entire membership, most of them, are apathetic. We are all to blame. If this union goes under, it's all of our faults. I will not blame Gabrielle Gutierrez for this union going under. I will not blame her for the policies that I think have been evidenced detrimental, because if our contracts are so groundbreaking and so wonderful, it would certainly show up economically in the solvency of our pension and health plan. And going down year on year in the biggest stock market boom boom, is black and white evidence. And if anybody thinks different, when they look at their funding statement, they're not, it would be cognitive dissonance. They're not paying attention to reality. So you have to honor the laws of science, mathematics, and truth, and stand in it. And if you want your union to be better, because I want it to be brilliant for you. I want you to be able to have it, everybody in your generation and before you, to have the opportunity to earn health care and earn a pension and actually be taken care of. I mean, how would it be if in 3 years this union goes under, our pension gets reorganized, and what people don't understand, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Act company, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Company, they're in the hole at deficit over $63 billion. That means if you worked 40 years in a business, the max you could get is $35 per year of vesting. That means if my pension is $6,000 a year or $8,000 at the max, the most money I can earn if this goes bankrupt is $1,400 a month for 40 years of work. The other thing...
You're saying if it gets reorganized,
if it got
or your
reorganized,
benefits get reduced to that much.
Yep. And the other thing that is so unconscionable to me is that I've worked 40 years. A staff member works 20. I have made more cumulative money than a staff. If a staff member made $75,000 for 15 years and then made 125 or 130 average the last 5, they can retire with a full pension, and they get 70% of their last or of their 5 best cumulative years. So it's their last 5 years. It doesn't go by their total income. It doesn't go by the years when they were making $60,000 a year. So for the last 5 years, if their average is 130, their pension's $100,000,
which is more than you.
The max for me, their caps are $215,000. So our upper echelon people like Duncan Crabtree, who make $350,000, and Ray Rodriguez $400,000, after 20 years they can take 70% of that up to the max of $215,000. So their pensions will be $215,000 a year. And yet somebody that worked double the time, like I've worked 40 years vested every year, and I can't get a full pension. I had to take a 30% cut because I retired at age 55. This is the part, this part is really unconscionable, because the members, I should have 5 of my best years. If I get 5 of my best consecutive years, like the staff, my pension's over $100,000 a year. So are many actors and many stunt brothers and sisters. Some people had a great run on a series, 3-4 years, made himself a couple million bucks or more. And it doesn't work that way. They don't get their best 5 years. So there's so many terms and conditions. In my humble opinion, this union has now been run for the benefit of the staff and not for the benefit of the members that founded it. It has lost its way. And unless the people, the actors that are producing, the Tom Hanks, the Sean Penns, the Mark Wahlbergs, all of them that are running on the televisions, Ted Danson's, everyone that's retired, take an interest and come down. Because if they all knew what I told them today, how their pension, that the millions of dollars that they made, and they're getting half of what the staff gets, there would be riots. And to have our leader, and respectfully, I disagree with David White. He talks about the best and the brightest. If you have the best and the brightest, and you say we couldn't get, like Gabriel Cateros always says, that we couldn't get this brilliant staff if we didn't pay them and give them that incentive of a pension. Well, I come from a bit of a Wall Street background, and you have to perform in order to get those bonuses. So if my question to the staff, and many of them are wonderful people, I'm not discounting the kindness and the professionalism of a lot of our staff, but if you're talking about giving them double our pension, I'm not in favor. It's a crime. It's unjust enrichment in my opinion. But where is the performance? David White, where's our contract improvements? In the last, since you've been at our helm, our contract amounts have gone up, but they have, you presented and produced no gains when you factor in the rate of inflation. Our pensions and health plan has gone anemic since you've been in power, and nobody in the staff has performed. Our ship, we're in a rented building. We waste money on SAG-AFTRA pins and another $1 million to $1.5 million. every 2 years on a convention that should be in the members' pocket, used for member services, to collect residuals, to improve on our contracts, to collective bargaining, to increase zones, union zones for actors, to increase rates, to make better deals like Netflix, so we can get background performers covered, so we can include all of that money coming in to contribute to our pension and health plan and protect members. This is the thing we're not doing. For the last 12 years, since that side has been in power, our economics are in the toilet. And I can read the LM2s, and anybody's welcome to go on the Department of Labor's website. The LM2s are financial statements that the union has to produce. It's a public document. You can get it on the Department of Labor website, usdol.gov, www.usdol.gov, and you can plug in the search SAG-AFTRA, and you could look for LM2, and those are financial statements. You can read how much all the staff makes, how much they earned, how much the new joins earned, and the bottom line is that we make $16 million on new joins every year. And now we're in lockdown, so no one's working. So we might have got some new joins the first 2 months. So you talk about $4 million a quarter. So if we lose 3 quarters, that's $12 million. And we were running $5 million at $5 million in the black. So then we're going to be, if this happens, and according to my calculation, we could be approximately $7 million in the hole. The only way to remedy this is for all the members to demand 2 things. Our actor dues contribution caps, they're at $500,000. So they've been that way forever. So actors only pay dues up to $500,000. It should go up to $2 million. That hasn't been increased in over 30 years. But that's the only spot that I'm talking that I believe so, but I could be wrong. It could be 20, but that hasn't been increased. If we increased it double, obviously we'd put a lot more money in our coffers, and we could do that just by a vote of the national board at a convention.
And just to make sure people are clear, that $500,000 that's not how much that our highest earners pay in dues, because there's a cap of, I think, $8,000 per dues period. So it's
right.
What you're saying is that, after $500,000, we're not even keeping track of their income. We don't even know what they're earning above and beyond $500,000.
Correct. If they make $10 million, you're right. They pay dues up to $500,000.
And that's it. And so they pay their base dues, which is a couple $100 a year, and then they pay 1.575% of their earnings up to a cap of around $8,000 per dues period. So the most we're earning from our highest performers is somewhere around $16,000 a year.
That's correct. And then when they make $10 million, $15 a year, or I'll even go from $2 to $15 million a year, a lot of them pay agents, managers, attorneys, and publicists, and they're all write-offable. And someone had informed me that our leadership said that the actors would never go for that because they couldn't write it off. I don't know what they're talking about. They're talking about actors. All these actors that make that kind of money, they're all in corporations. That's a completely ignorant statement. Anybody that's making that kind of money is in a corporation and has a Schedule C. So all of that is a write-off. And if actors had to pay that, they'd write it off.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Well, we've got to wrap it up for the moment, but I am so excited and thankful we got to start this conversation, Pete. Thank you so much for all of your years of service. I really am excited for people to hear all of this information from you and get to know you better. And I hope this will just be the first of many conversations we can have. Yeah,
thank you very much. In closing, if people listen to this sooner than later, write your leadership, write David White, write Gabriel Cateras, and demand they raise the pension contribution caps double. Negotiate that, stand for that. It should be a strikeable issue. I believe it's the most important issue that we face because it affects our health and our pension plan. And without that, there's no reason to be in a union. it'll really put it into a tailspin where potential reorganization would happen. And then also write to Gabrielle and David and demand that our member dues cap be increased to minimum of $1 million. I believe it should be 2, but let's start at $1 million and see where our economics are. And respectfully, studying economics, the proper way to do it is to have the economist David Viviano run the numbers and see what they would have to bring it up to in order to protect the solvency of our union in accordance with better contracts and better contributions given to our pension plan. There's a lot of factors, but
yeah, and for your information, for those listening, David Viviano he works for the union. He's our chief economist, and so it's his job to run these numbers and keep track of those types of things. So if you heard about, you said the pension contribution caps and the member dues cap. Those are the two things. And if those are new terms for you, at least this can be a starting point for you to educate yourself and ask questions about that so that you can understand why that's important. But you're hearing this from somebody who's been a 40-year member and somebody who's been very successful and been in leadership for 10 years. So I think it's good for all of us to take that seriously and to really look into that. Pete, we'll talk again soon, but thank you so much.
But lastly, if anybody would like to read this information, you go to my website, peteantico.com, ANTICO. Go to peteantico.com. And you can go to my fact page. There's a tab that says fact page, and it'll give you a lot of the information written out about the LM2s, about the travel provisions that were true that were given away. A lot of this information I'm speaking of is written on my website. Feel free to study. The most powerful membership is the most educated one.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, brother.